So, welcome everybody to Marketing Yourself Back Home While Studying in the UK. This is a series of webinars brought to you by International Futures, which is a website and blog which has resources that tries to help international students find work in the UK and back home. Here at the Careers Group, we recognise that that can be quite difficult for international students, and so we want to help. These webinars and the website and the blog are all ways we use to try and help you to find work where you want to find it. You will certainly find something on the blog and the website to help you. And there are in fact some blogs directly linked in to this webinar. Just to say as well that once we finish the webinar, we will have the slides on the site so you can go back and check references and resources to suit you. I'm Karen Deadfield. I'm a careers consultant at the University of London, and I'm as ably assisted here today by Mark Gilbert, also from the University of London, who's a careers information officer here. He has already been sending you messages and he will be helping to answer questions and so on as we go through. So let's get started. As we get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping to do. So just to point out those of you that are new to webinars or just need a reminder, at the bottom right of your display section, you'll see a number of things that are going to happen that you can input to give your questions and so on. There's a question section and a chat section. So do make use of those when Mark invites you to do so or I invite you to do so. We will also have some polls. We will ask you questions to get your responses so we get a bit of a picture of who's out there and how we can best help you. And there's the hands up function, which I've already mentioned, which is useful for us to understand when people can hear or whether they want to vote on something. Just a final note on the technicals, we mute you so that there is no background noise interrupting people's enjoyment of this webinar. So to start, we're going to launch the first poll, and this is really just to establish how confident you are feeling at this stage as we start the webinar. So we're going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is low and 5 is high, what is your confidence in marketing yourself back home? Just select one of those numbers. So 5 if you're already feeling very confident, 1 if you're not at all confident. And as we get the figures in for that, we'll put a graphic together and share that with you so you can see how your fellow listeners are feeling about this topic of marketing yourself back home. So we're going to share the results with you now. And mostly, well, no one feels very confident. It's mostly around the middle, 3, some at 4, so a little bit of confidence, perhaps just trying to top up your knowledge, your understanding, your comfort level really with marketing yourself back home. But there are 1 or 2 who are really quite low in terms of what they feel about. So we're going to aim to build on that as we go through the webinar. We're going to offer you some help to think about what you want to do. That's where we're going to start. So think about the kinds of things you will want to do when you go back home. And we're also going to be asking some questions to help you understand your home market, to think about networking, to try and think through some responses to barriers that sometimes come up. And then we'll put all of that together and think about how you can sell a UK education. Our aim today really is to help you demonstrate the value of your UK degree when you get home. So, in effect, I'm going to cover some basic things you need to do to maximise your chance of success, and talk about resources quite a lot that you might find useful. So things you can use after this webinar to really build up your knowledge, your understanding, and how you can put yourself across in a really effective way. We'll also just touch very briefly on how to find vacancies. And of course, we will be recommending that you talk to your careers service who can help you put this all together in a very effective way. This is largely, as you'll know from the title, about marketing yourself at home while you're still studying here, but some of it is the kind of activity you will continue to do when you do get back home or to another country. So we're going to start with a little exercise for you to do. I'm going to give you a few minutes just to think about these 3 areas. So what about the career you'd really like to get into? What sort of thing are you considering? Now, it may be that at the moment you don't really have a clear idea, but just try and narrow it down as much as you can into something. It could be quite broad, so you're perhaps interested in retail or possibly teaching, or you could have a much clearer and more specific idea. So perhaps you want to work as a buyer for a global fashion brand rather than generally in retail, or perhaps you want to teach primary pupils in a particular country. So however detailed you want to go, just think about what area you are most interested in at the moment. And I want you to think about 3 knowledge gaps about this sector or this type of job. What do you need to find out that you don't already know? Is it something technical about what the job is like? Is it about more broad sector issues? The types of companies or organisations that operate in the sector? Or perhaps for specific roles, what are the entry requirements? Or where do you hear about the jobs that you might be interested in? Once you have your career area and some knowledge gaps, some things you need to find out, I want you to think about how would you go about finding out the answers to those questions. As we go through then, I'm going to be suggesting places that you can find out this information. So keep this note with you and think about, as we go through, which are the best ways for you to find out. Just the last thing to say on this slide, in the top right, there's a red question mark. Towards the end of the webinar, this will come up again, and this is when you can build on what you thought about here and see whether the webinar has helped you to think through how you will do this research and answer these questions. So let's start with, how do you bring yourself up to speed with the local market? Just by the by, I noticed there are some problems with the screen occasionally. Just stick with it. It looks like it might be atmospheric problems, but it is mostly 100%. So I apologise for the slight problems there. So bringing yourself up to speed with the local market. How do you find out what's going on back home in terms of exploring your career options there? So the first thing I'm going to suggest is that you need to have good labour market information. And all this means is, when you think about the sector you are interested in, what are the big stories? How is it developing? What kinds of press coverage are you getting? Are there particular innovations in your field or changes in the law that affect the industry? What do you know about it? Can you find out basic data about it? How many organisations operate in that particular geographical area? And think about the organisations or companies that operate there. Who are they? What do they do? What's the competition? What's their strategy? How are they driving that forward? The press is a good source of information here. Newspapers, locally and globally, will be able to give you some of that information, but do think about other sources that might help you. And then, what are the growth areas? Areas with a high demand for employees. If in that first exercise you found you didn't have much of a preference, this could be a place you could start. Where are they really looking for people, and does that seem to match well with your degree subject or your skills? What kind of role do you want to do, and does that fit with that as well? Then you need to think about how you will work through the recruitment process. Do you know whether you need to send in an application form or a CV or fill in some questions online? How many interview stages are there? When does all of this happen? You need to really understand the techniques you will need. Is there a job description, or do you need to check information on the website? Recruitment process is quite a difficult thing to get information on for smaller organisations, but many of the larger and particularly the global organisations now have a careers section, and it's worth checking that just to see how they explain how the recruitment process works. And don't forget that your careers service can help you with all of these things as well. Particularly, for example, if you need to update your CV or get some interview practice, which we'll come to later. Finally, do you know the dates for applications? What are the deadlines? And do you know how you should apply? Do they recruit on campus, for example? Could you come along with a CV to a careers fair and find out whether you could apply directly with them during that time? For example, here at the University of London in Senate House, we have London Graduate Fair this week on Wednesday. You may want to come along and speak to some organisations there. So lots of ideas there for you just to start thinking about the research you could do on the sector, the organisations, the type of jobs, and the people who already operate in those sectors in your country. We're going to look now at some resources. I'm just going to bring up some on the screen here, and then I'm going to take you through to the web and show you some of these. So many of you will already be familiar, I think, with Going Global. You will need to access this through your careers service because they will show you the better screens that give you more detail. Prospects, many of you may have worked with because they give some quite good CV advice. They talk about job sectors, but they have a section working abroad. GradLink is great for certain countries, primarily China, Malaysia, India and Africa. They've recently added Canada and they're adding more countries all the time, so do have a look at that. Job Online has a lot of jobs in this country, but it does also offer jobs in other countries. That could be big global companies that have vacancies all over the world, or specifically organisations recruiting for a particular country. Don't forget your local university careers service. The newspapers all carry adverts which may include international jobs, and don't forget the local press in your own country. And there are trade magazines. So, for example, Marketing Week carries adverts for jobs overseas. And then just you may find interesting in terms of how you make the transition back. UKCISA, UKCISA has lots of interesting and useful information for international students, primarily around visas and working in this country, but also preparing to return home, and things like the dangers of reverse culture shock. Now, I'm just going to go into the web for you for a second and show you some of these. So, Going Global, this is a very useful website that talks about working in other countries other than the United States. So you also have UK in here as well. And if we just click through on a country, you can see you can click near the flag to Italy, which is where I've spent some time, and you can see that it gives you lots of useful information about the kind of CVs you need, what cover letters are like, what the employment trends are, interviewing advice, and so on. And if you notice here, it's helpful for foreign job seekers to search out a strong contact who can introduce him or her into the working and business environment of interest. That little piece of advice there is a really useful thing to have, and it just gives you a bit of an overview of what you will need to know that might be different to your own country. Similarly with prospects, we have working abroad, which again gives you details of how to research different countries and what it's like to work there. Again, looking at Italy, plenty of jobs available for English teachers and fruit pickers. GradLink I mentioned for particular countries, and you can see that the countries are marked up here. You can find all kinds of useful advice, some profiles of graduates to give you some examples, and so on. Job Online, again, this is mainly for working in the UK, but there are international jobs here. And for example, if you put a country like India into the search function, you'll find a whole load of jobs coming up with location India, and that's really the quickest way to do it. That's a nice simple function for just working out what kind of jobs are available, and then you can also limit them by job sector or job type. I mentioned UK CESA. This is the returning home section. This is a great website for international student affairs, and this was the page I mentioned, which is Reverse Culture Shock, and it talks a little bit about what it's like to transition home. So if you think about when you first came to this country to study, you may have had some surprises, different customs, different ways that people study, attitudes may have been different to what you were expecting. And if you've been here for a year or more, you may have a similar culture shock going home. So it just gets you to think about that a little bit so that you can really prepare yourself for that return. So let's go back to our slideshow. There you'll see is the list of resources we've just really scooted around and had a look at. You will have these in the slides when they go on to the website, and that will give you a good store of places to check out both research for information about organisations, but also what it's like working in different countries. So we're going to go to another poll in a moment, and this one is much more about what your intentions are. You've had quite a long time to think now about what you think you're going to do, where you're going to go. So this just explores for you and for us to get a sense of where are you going back to? Are you going back to your home country, to another country that isn't the UK, so another overseas country, or are you still to decide? If you can just vote on that now, and we'll see what kind of results are coming in. Once we've got enough answers through, we'll post the results for you. So we're still waiting for a few people to vote. If you haven't voted, if you could vote now, then we'll get the results out to you as quickly as we can. Okay, so currently undecided, a lot of you. So it looks like these resources are going to be most helpful for you once you have made some decisions, although you might use it to do some research about the different countries and the different ways of finding work as well. So 52% undecided, 28% going back to home country, 21% to another overseas country. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for doing all of these polls and asking questions and chatting. The more that you join in, the better it is for us and for you, because we get more of a sense of what it is that you need from us. So let's move on now to networking. Networking is important in most countries, I think, but perhaps works in different ways. So let's just start by thinking about why networking is so important. How can it help you? Why should you maintain and build your network? We've already looked at some online resources, and there are some places you can network there, on job boards and so on. But here are some other ways to think about it. One of the reasons is to keep up to date with the job market trends back home. It's important that you get a sense of what's going on, if sectors are booming, if there are interesting developments. So it's a way of building up information above and beyond online resourcing or paper resourcing. So you can find out more about what's going on through the people that you know back home. There are also contacts to turn to once you return home. If you keep in contact with people who might be able to tell you about the kind of jobs that are available, or maybe give you some hints about what's expected now, trends in CVs and what they're looking for, that can be very helpful to you. Jobs are often not advertised. This happens in some countries more than others. If you think back to Italy, when we were just looking at that on the Going Global website, it's important that you have a contact to introduce you into a sector, to their contacts, so they feel they can trust that you would be a good worker there because you've come through a trusted contact. So that's something to bear in mind. And remember that every time you develop your network and maintain it by keeping in contact with people, you can then start to tap into their network too. Networks lead to other networks. And later on, we'll come to looking a little bit at LinkedIn for those of you who are interested in that, which is a great example about how you build your networks through connecting with other people's networks. So, what is networking? Here are some ideas about what it really consists of. It can be helpful as well to be clear about the time you're going to take when you talk to people, when you make contact with them. So think about perhaps negotiating with them over a coffee or over the phone that you're just going to take 15 or 20 minutes of their time. And bear in mind as well, the networking works differently in different countries. So we've talked about in Italy, you will network through someone very, very frequently. That's completely normal and what people would expect you to do, rather than just cold calling, picking up a phone and trying to connect with someone. On the other hand, in the USA, it's much more common to cold call. They would expect you to take the initiative. So just to summarize then, networking. You want to be talking to the people and being interested in them. You want to be finding out what they do by asking interesting questions. And you also want to share your interests so they get an insight into you and how you might be useful. Remember, you're not just asking for a job, you're doing your research. This is building your understanding of the sector, the organisation, the type of role you might be going for. You might then be asking if there are vacancies coming up, but try and go in with a broader view. That means you're going to get much more of a wealth of information out from it. And they may, of course, be able to give you contact details. They may not be the right person to talk to, but they may give you their contact details anyway. But they may also be able to give you the contact details of others who could help you. And I'm sure many of you already do this, but do remember to maintain contact after meeting with them or talking with them on the phone. You can do that with a nice thank you email, or by connecting on LinkedIn, or by trying to organise other meetups and acknowledging the help you've had from the first person you spoke with. Just as one other suggestion that you may have heard of, and you can Google this very easily, there's something called the elevator pitch. And the elevator pitch is where you think about the top 3 or 4 things someone would want to know about you in order to find out if you were suitable to work in their organisation, and kind of imagine what it would be like if you were in a lift or elevator and happened to bump into a senior member of the team in that organisation, and just say, how interesting to meet you. You know, I'm really interested in working with you. Here is what I can offer. But Google it, because there's lots of great material online which can talk you through in more detail how to do that. So on networking, let's think about what you need to do in order to really make the most of the contacts you have. Well, I'll start by saying both personal and professional networking are important. So professional networking might be through work you currently have, or through going to conferences or meetings, and personal is perhaps in a less formal setting. So perhaps you've gone to dinner with some friends and someone works in a sector you're really interested in. You'll take it slightly differently. You might not want to ask a lot of questions of someone that you're meeting in a more informal environment, but think about what the 2 or 3 key questions might be and really take an interest in what they're talking about. Bear in mind that international recruiters often come to this country to recruit if they want to find quite a lot of people at once. They may come to your university, or they may come to careers fairs. Try and find out from your careers service if there are events of that kind coming to your campus, so that you can make a note and prepare for that in exactly the same way you would with any kind of employer contact. And don't underestimate the power of connecting through societies that you might join at university or more generally in London. So for example, if you're doing an international masters in management or marketing, you could join a marketing society. They may bring in recruiters to talk to you in evening events. And then again, you can make a connection with them, you can give them your card or take their card, and you can use that contact to think about how you can learn more about the sector, their organisation, the kind of roles that they may be recruiting to, and so on. You may have friends back home that you're still in touch with, or indeed students who you've done the course with who have already gone home, who finished earlier than you. They may be useful contacts. Do keep in touch with them. It's easy to do now through Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, and find out what are they doing that might be interesting and useful for you. And similarly, expat groups. There are lots of online networks by geographical area, by country or by interest. Use LinkedIn. I'll come on to LinkedIn in a second and I'll show you there's a student part of LinkedIn now where you can find out all kinds of useful things, including finding out who are the alumni from your university who may be working in an area that you will find useful. And you can always use all of these connecting opportunities, this networking, to arrange meetups to find out more. So I talked about LinkedIn briefly there, and this is the link I was talking to you about. LinkedIn has a student section. They're very, very keen to make LinkedIn really user-friendly for students. And there are a whole series of really useful videos, and I'll just show you the landing page in a second, where you can just get really straightforward tuition on how to go about it. And the first thing you'll do if you're not already on LinkedIn is develop a professional presence, and you do this by creating a profile. Don't worry about this very long and complex link. You can just Google checklist LinkedIn and that will take you right there, and I'll show you that in a second as well. Once you've got your profile, you can connect to the people you meet. You should always connect to people who you do know, even if you've only met them once or twice and they've agreed to connect with you. But again, all of the etiquette around LinkedIn is on the site. You can research employers and make contact with them. So you could follow, I don't know, IBM or Palmolive, whatever it is, follow organisations that you would like to work for and look at the contacts within those organisations. You can also join groups that may be linked to a chosen industry or a region. So for example, I'm very interested in the charity sector and I'm connected into a group there which is about working in the charities in this country. I'm aware that for LinkedIn, this may not stretch to all countries. It's more popular in some than others. So while we're looking at LinkedIn, think about the kind of linked networks that you might have in your home country that's different. So I'm just briefly now going to show you those LinkedIn links. This is the one for students, and if I just go to the top for you, this is LinkedIn Higher Education, so it's for students. So signing up is free and very, very simple to do. It shows you all of its functionality if you follow the linked videos. 3 basic tips for using LinkedIn there: how to have a really great profile, and a recruiter there talking about what they want. They're very diligent detectives, as it says there, and they will explain what they want you to be able to show in your profile. It's worth saying, for those of you who are going to a country where LinkedIn is used routinely, that for some sectors now, LinkedIn has some adverts that don't show anywhere else. So for example, in marketing, again, a lot of jobs now only show up on LinkedIn. So do bear that in mind as well. Then I mentioned the student checklist, and this is what it is. It just shows you, going through from the top, from the profile, all the things you need to complete and how to go about it. And there's a lovely sample there for you to see. Take it down a little bit, that's it. So about how to have a professional photo, how to phrase your headline, and so on and so on. Lots of examples of how to make it work really well for you. So that just gives you a very brief view of that, so you can go in and have a look for yourselves if that's something that's going to be useful to you. So create a profile using the checklist, connect, follow employers, participate in groups. And if you participate in groups, actually, then once something is new helping that group, or with the employers as well, that will come up in your daily news feed, so you can see what's going on and keep up to date. Finally, if you use Twitter or Facebook, do follow companies there as well, and that will give you a great set of information and news updates to help you keep up to date with what's going on in those industries. So we've looked a lot at how to research, at how to build your profile, how to connect with people, all positive things that will help you come to a point where you have a better understanding of what you want to do and a really clear understanding of how to go about doing it. But what about the barriers? I'm sure a lot of you out there saying that's all very well, but sometimes things don't go as clearly as that and we get stuck. That's very true. So this is really just to give you some ideas about how to think about possible barriers that might get in the way when you're here and you're thinking about marketing yourselves back home. So you might get this kind of comment back from a potential employer. They might say, I've never heard of your university. I think that's less likely with the University of London, but if you're with one of the smaller colleges and you mention that, they may be suspicious because they don't know it. There's an example here of a website of one of the rankings of universities. So you could try looking for it in that ranking or in other rankings. If you, again, go into Google and put university rankings in, you'll get a whole range of them, and it may help if you have that to show a future employer, just to say this is where they are in the rankings in the world and this is what they do. In your particular area, of course, it may be that your university is very important in the research field and you can quote particular bits of research or find press coverage which shows how well thought of it is. So there are ways of you to kind of anticipate that objection and think about how you might counter that argument. An employer might also say, I don't understand your qualification. How good is it? This sometimes comes up if you've done a one-year MA. Because a master's qualification is often 2 years in other countries, they may think that this is only a partial qualification. So again, it's up to you to think about how can you sell the idea of your master's qualification that you've completed in a year. One of the ways you could do it is to say it's the same as a 2-year one, but you've followed it at a much more intense pace. So you've covered as much ground as you would for a 2-year, but you've done it in 1 year. And you can emphasize this further by talking about the different modules you've covered. But think about the particular subjects that are relevant to the job you're going for and the amount you've covered and the quality of what you've covered as well. Other barriers might be that you've missed the campus recruitment cycle. Perhaps you weren't well informed or you hadn't realised it happened as early as it does. Where there is a cycle, this will vary from country to country, so it may not be logical. You might expect it to be autumn or spring, but perhaps, for example, in Australia, they may do things differently. Similarly, how they do it may be different. So it's important to be prepared and to do your research about a particular country and how it recruits. For example, in India, it's often the case that at a recruitment fair or a careers fair, they would expect to take your CV and review that at the fair itself, not to take it away and get back in touch with you if they're interested. And often they will interview at the fair and they might even offer you a job there and then. So make sure that you keep informed about these things and that you're prepared when you go into that recruitment cycle. Some employers, when students have studied in the UK or the US, report that they feel they have unrealistic expectations. They expect a salary that's similar to what you would have in London or New York, or they want immediate levels of responsibility, or to be located centrally in the key marketplace. This is quite a difficult one because, having done your studies, you do want to get a good job with a good salary and perhaps some good responsibility early on. But it pays to really think about what the employer is expecting, to do your research about what they expect to pay, how quickly you can get responsibility, and so on. And there's a great resource that will help you with this. It's a website called Glassdoor. And if you Google that, you'll find that they have information on a lot of key global organizations. They're very, they're full of employee assessments of what it's like to work there, of what their salaries are, and they even have a global communities salary checker. So that's a good port of call if you just want to understand what is it like working in the Indian office of a particular company, for example. We mentioned before reverse culture shock, so do think about what was it like to transition into the UK in terms of the customs or the expectations of study and so on, and what will it be like to go back having spent time here. Things may have changed back home, your family may be the same in terms of their expectations of you, but you've had some independence now and your expectations may not be the same. Just be prepared for things being different. Think about how you might deal with that. And here's something else that an employer might say. They might think that if you've had a taste of studying away from home, that you might be frustrated, perhaps because of that reverse culture shock. How can you reassure them that this is something you want to do for the long term, that you will stay for the period of your contract? Perhaps you can be clear on why you're returning home. That it was a great adventure to go to the UK and study, to give yourself that challenge of perhaps studying in a language that isn't your mother tongue, but that now that you've done that and you've developed skills in another language and understanding a different environment, that now you want to use that at home. Something like that might help, but that's really for you to think about and decide what's the best answer for you, really. So before we go into selling your university and UK experience, I just want to see, are there any questions about what we've talked about so far? Mark, I know, has been answering a few of them, but are there any more that you think you would like to ask at this point before we bring that all together and think about what might be some of those things you can say to reassure an employer that you have something additional to offer? And while you're at it, are there some ideas that you have for selling your experience or for resources you've found successful? Okay, while we're waiting for some of those answers to come in and selecting them, let's just start thinking about how you sell your university and UK experience. So the first thing there is overseas education and global outlook. This is great for multinationals, but could be good as well for organisations that are perhaps thinking about expanding overseas and starting on the import-export side of business. It means not only that you understand the education system and perhaps mix with people from all over the world, which will help also in bringing a kind of a global view of how business can work, but also you may well have developed language skills. And fluent business level English is a great asset in many, many different sectors. Even if you if your first language is already English, you may have been mixing with people from all over the world and understood a great more about their particular customs or how they do business. So there are lots of ways that you can be getting a great advantage from having studied here. Also from being here, you will have specialist market knowledge perhaps of the Eurozone and the UK in particular, not just as a consumer of services and products here, but you may have done special projects, you may have done your own research while you were here, and you may also have perhaps some work experience while you were over here in order to meet more people or earn a bit of money, or you may have done some volunteering and built up relationships with people here in that way. That's something that many organisations would be very happy to know about. And similarly, you may have had some positions of responsibility where you can talk about your leadership skills, perhaps in an unfamiliar environment. That's always a great asset. So, are there any questions that we want to deal with that we haven't already dealt with, Mark? No? No. Okay, so nothing particular has come up. I'm hoping what that means is that you really feel like we're covering most of the main things that you want to know about. Let's move on then to a bit of thinking. Oh, sorry, and contacts internationally. I'm sorry, I left out the last one there. This is really important, actually. I definitely don't want to miss this one out. This is about contacts that you may have built up in this country through the academics in your university, but also fellow students on your course or in the societies you've joined who will be going back to their countries and may be useful in other ways to you. Make sure you do connect with them and keep networking with them. You never know how they could be useful to you. So, having thought about all those things, how you might research, how you might use resources, all of that different kind of stuff, I want you now to think about, mobility and adaptability. Sorry, that's another one I missed. Let's go on to exercise. You've had some tips and some ideas, and we've talked a little bit about the things that you might do to market yourself back home. I'm going to give you a few minutes now just to think about what you're going to do. Go back to that original slide with the question mark where we talked about 3 things that you were going to have a think about, and those were: what about the career area you would like to go into, a general sector or a particular role that you're interested in? 3 knowledge gaps about this area, and 3 ways you could find out more. I'm hoping that having gone through these slides, this webinar today, you will have found some of that useful so that you can think about where you would find out more to answer your questions to fill those gaps. So I want you now to think about what you're going to do. Write down 3 things that you'll do to market yourself back home. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions, do send them in and we will try to deal with them here. These 3 things could be almost anything in relation to what we've been talking about today. It could be something you're going to do for research. It could be some use you're going to make of the resources, a particular resource that you found most useful. You could be thinking about people to contact for networking purposes. Or you might be thinking, well, I think what I need to do first and foremost is to go into the careers service and get my CV checked. So hopefully you've had enough time just to think about those things. If not, after this webinar, perhaps you'll take some time to reflect and think about what it is that you're going to do next. It's really important with these webinars that you think about your own actions. How will this help you to move forward? And one of the ways you can get help to move forward is your careers service. Now, every university and the colleges within the University of London has a careers service to some extent. Some of them have their own permanent services, some have people who come in now and again. Do find out through perhaps the web pages how you can find out about what's going on. But it should give you an opportunity to talk to a careers advisor. Often there are what we call quick queries where you have 15 minutes chat with a careers advisor or a careers consultant. You can bring any question and they will help you to move forward. You can also get CV and application forms checked. Mostly in career services there'll be fixed times for this and for the quick queries, so do check how that works in your particular service. If you're successful with your CV or application, then you can get a practice interview. These are usually limited to how many you can have a year, but you will get an hour with a careers consultant or advisor when you have a precise date for an interview, and you will bring your particular queries and perhaps get some questions asked. You can practice answering and see where you think there is work still to do to get even better at interviews. Many career services also can link you into online aptitude tests. This is very much a growing area. A lot of organisations, particularly the big international organisations, do now ask for people to do online tests. Very often a telephone interview to start with and an online test before you even get to an interview live face-to-face with somebody. Careers offices also often have vacancies and job online or an information library. Generally, they can just help you find the information you need. I've given you some links to lots of resources today, but they have even more. So if none of those seems to be addressing the particular issue you have, or they aren't specific enough, then do come into your career service and they will be able to help you. Again, in most colleges, you will be able to see employer presentations. These may be simply an employer sends someone along to talk to you about the opportunities there and how to apply. Or you may have an alumni panel. This is where previous students from your college have come along to talk about a particular sector, so perhaps financial services. They have studied there the same way as you are studying there, so they have a particular link with your course or your university, and they can give you the reality of what it's like to work for that organisation and what tips they would have for being successful, which is a really helpful thing. Our students tell us all the time that these are a particularly useful resource. And of course, we've mentioned many times the careers fairs, and on Wednesday the 17th this week we have the London Graduate Fair, so do please come along to that and see if you can get some support, both in terms of getting your CV checked. We have a CV surgery on Wednesday, and to meet a whole load of different employers and ask them about what they look for in their graduate recruits. So that's all the input from me today. If there are any final questions, do please send them through and we will attempt to answer them. But we're going to go now to our final poll, which is just to check now what your confidence level is. At the beginning, we set a poll to say how confident did you feel at the start of this process. Now that I've sent you through some resources, some ways of approaching things to think about really in marketing yourself effectively when you get home or to another overseas country, really to get you started thinking and give you some first steps that if you haven't already done that. And now I want to know, has any of that helped really? Do you feel more confident now or less confident? Again, it's the same 1 to 5 level. So 5 if you're feeling very confident, 1 not very confident. And once we have enough people voting, we'll share the results with you and we can see how well we've done. Just need a few more people to vote so we can get some decent figures on that. anyone else want to vote now? And then we'll close the poll now. And what you can see is, happily, it looks like the numbers have gone up. So certainly that large number on 3, I think it was 50-odd% on 3, have really moved up. It looks like in bulk to level 4. So there are still a few people at 1 who are not very confident. So if any of those people want to send in a question to explain why they're still not very confident, then we'll be happy to offer some suggestions there. But it does look like most of you have moved up a little bit in that. So thank you for taking part in that. The last thing just to say is this is one of a series of talks that International Futures has run over last week and this. Last week we had one on writing UK CVs and application forms, and one on finding full-time work and work experience in the UK. Hopefully some of you will have been able to attend that one and hear what my colleagues had to say to help you with those things. If not, then again, these slides will be put onto the International Futures website. The address is there, so you can go in and have a look and see what advice they offer. This is the third in the series, this one on marketing yourself back home. We are recording this one, so you should also be able to hear my voice. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but you will be able to hear me talking through the slides and get some advice and see the resource links, for example, to that one. We have one more remaining this week, and that's Wednesday the 17th of June, using LinkedIn for a global job search. So for those of you who do think LinkedIn is going to help you in the country where you intend working, then do sign up for that one. You can still sign up right up until the last minute. So go back to your original email where you signed up for this one and click on that link. I believe there are still places if you want to sign up for that. And good luck with your search. So lastly, to say thank you very much for attending. I wish you all the best in your search. And just to finally reiterate, your careers service is just waiting to help you. You can phone and get an appointment, you can email, and you can check the website to find out the best way to contact your particular service. They do vary from college to college, but the one thing they have in common is we all love to help you find the career you want. So thanks very much. I'm going off air now, but if you have any questions, we'll be here for another few minutes. Do send them on. Thanks for listening.